Hey friends, I was developing some transparent objects or objects that are somewhat transparent in Blender and wanted to share some things that I figured out and makes it pretty straightforward. I'm using Blender 2.80 beta, which is quite a different user interface in some ways than 2.79. But there's a lot of things that are familiar. I'm using cycles nodes, but in order to make this work for Decentraland and Babylon, I'm using the new principled BSDF shader as the primary shader, which produces outputs that work with Babylon and Decentraland. And in this scene I've created a cube and a plane as two different ways you might go think about making a very thin object like foliage or a window with dirt or paint on it or a stencil on it or something. And the plane is seems to be the better solution, and here's why. If you apply the transparent texture, which I'll explain how you do in a little bit, to a plane and to a box that's made very thin, and a plane that I've added a Solidify modifier to. And in both cases, in the plane, the Solidify modifier is 2 millimeters thick, and in the case of the box, the mesh is where do I have it here? Anyway, the mesh is 2 millimeters thick also. But the difference is, and this is important, this is what's important, is that if you turn the objects, the plane is on the right here. This is the plane and this is the box. If you turn the objects, you can see that the plane on the right, the image that I've applied to it is mirrored on the other side correctly, but the box, which you get on the other side, is well, now it's behaving nicely. It is mirrored on both sides. Not what I expected, but it works. If I put that object in the BabylonJS sandbox, I don't get the mirroring on the other side of the box, but I do get it on the other side of the plane. So basically I recommend using a plane for something like foliage or windows, but making it have a little bit of thickness. If you don't make it have a little thickness, it'll be transparent on one side completely. So you want to definitely, on the plane mesh, add a modifier. It's fighting with me now. Oh, here it is, this modifier. I added a modifier called Solidify. I guess that's the name of it there, Solidify. And I made it have a thickness of 2 millimeters. It could be probably something other than that. But it means that it works both in Blender and in Babylon Sandbox, which you can use at sandbox.babylonjs.com. You just, when you first come to it, it looks like this, and you just take your objects, gltf2 and its bin and its ping, it has an alpha. I just drop them in here, and you can see what it's going to look like. Decentraland uses this rendering engine for their default client, so and for the SDK, so this is what it would look like. And as you can see, the mirroring doesn't work on the box, but it does on the plane. Okay, so going back here to how the materials were set up. They're set up the same on both objects. So I am using nodes, and I'm starting with a Alt click drag. I'm starting with a texture coordinate node, and just simply use the cube object. And there's those choices there. And going from the UV to the vector on, this is a texture image node. And when you put a texture in it, it takes on that name. So you put the ping file that has the alphas into here. You select it and add it to that. And then since it has both color and alpha, I take the color and apply it to the base color of the principled BSDF shader. That's doing the main painting on the box or the plane. And I take the alpha channel of that ping that has an alpha for the foliage, and I put it into the factor input on a mix shader. The factor input works properly with an alpha mask, but if you didn't connect it, then the factor determines whether the image is transparent or whether it's opaque. But when you put in an alpha channel that is properly formed, it actually controls that pixel by pixel. So, and then the output of the principled BSDF shader, whose color is coming from this texture map, is one of the two things being mixed here. And the other thing being mixed is this kind of special node called a transparent BSDF, which simply sends out transparency if you have it white. Sends out transparency information to this side of the mixer, and then the alpha channel selects on a pixel by pixel basis from the alpha channel in the foliage, picks whether each pixel in here is going to be transparent or whether it's going to be the color of the color in the texture map. And then I just put that into the material output as a surface, and that's it. I've done the same thing with both of these objects. These two materials are identical. Okay, that's pretty much it. I had some notes here. Just wanted to share them. So you use the cycled nodes arrangement. This is how you get transparency on 2.80 principled BSDF nodes. So you use the cycle nodes arrangement like in that drawing. You have to do some sort of UV mapping of the object, but if it's a simple plane, then that texture coordinate node is sufficient, and you just use the UV, the texture coordinate node and set it to a cube, and that'll work fine. The texture image node is where you put the ping file in that has an alpha channel. You can see most of this here, but there's a couple little tricks here at the end that are important. If you're using the cycles renderer, you're done when you get this node arrangement set up. But if you want to use the EV renderer in 2.80, which is very nice and very fast, then you also have to set the materials blend mode to alpha blend or some alpha mode. Let me show you that. On the material here, you have to set the blend mode to alpha mode or one of those other alpha modes. Blend mode seems to be a good one. If you don't do that, then the EV renderer, actually the transparent areas will be black and won't look right at all. So that's one thing. If you have an image that you want to use that doesn't have an alpha, and it's like a JPEG, but if it's kind of bright, well lit where the image should be visible and it's black where it should be transparent, you could use the color output from the image instead of the alpha output to drive the not only the base color but also the factor on the transparency. And here's an example of something that was done that way. This image didn't have an alpha. It's probably a JPEG, I'm guessing. But it has, it was very dark around the outside of the leaf. And so they use the color not only for the base color on the BSDF, principal BSDF, but they also use it for the factor on the shader for transparency. You want to put the transparency into the top shader so that alpha set to transparency will set it to be what you get. If you switch these here, it'll be backwards. Okay. Back here, sorry. Yeah, I was just also saying that it seems to make sense to use a plane and then use the Solidify modifier to make it a little bit thicker. So that's the whole thing, and I hope that's helpful.